Hey, Art History. Today we're going to talk about War era Europe. These are the artists right before the First World War, during the First World War, reacting to the First World War, um, and so we're going to start with the German Expressionists. The German Expressionists were known for emotion, kind of dark genres, abstractions. There were different schools. Two main ones were the Blue Rider and the Bridge. And when you start with Kirchner here, you can see his image of Dresden in 1908. And it sort of borrows from some of the ideas of the Fauves and some of the post-impressionists. But the difference is the kind of darkness associated with it. So in the street scene, you see people scurrying along, um, sort of this like anonymous crowd where, we see big hats and stuff, but the faces don't necessarily matter. And then the few faces we do see, we have this kind of sort of green mask on this woman. And she's definitely sort of blurred. You have this child that students and I often ponder about what just happened or what is about to happen with this child. You have the streetcar, so you have a sign of somewhat modernity, but people are wearing fashion of the times and kind of wandering through the street. They use the kind of punchy colors of the Fauves, but there, as you can tell, there's like a darker scale and something ominous associated with this. But it's definitely about feeling and expression, but with a German sort of touch. So if you look back into the various German art that we've looked at, it has a very kind of different feeling and emotion behind it, and you can see that here too. They felt they were a bridge from the past to the future. This is Kirchner's an example of this kind of group, the bridge, and they protested materialism. And they also live together and practice old guild-style mentoring and tutoring. So they're looking towards modernity, but they also see some positives of the past as well. Next up, we have Kandinsky. And Kandinsky is an example of the other school, which is the Blue Rider. It was formed in Munich in 1911, and it's named for their love of painting horses in the color blue. They were interested in actually Buddhism and mysticism, so they actually had a lot of kind of international influences from this kind of shift to knowing about the world a bit more. They also used music and technology and philosophy to inform their art. Kandinsky is actually one of the first truly abstract painters. So his works kind of really definitely go through forms that kind of do not look like realistic figures. He used music as well as science. He was interested in atomic structure, chemistry, and physics. And he also was interested in color and line. And his work was named after musical things like improvisations. So his work is kind of as a blend with science, music, and art. This is Egon Schiele, who's actually a very controversial artist. Schiele actually definitely had some, sort of is on his own, actually. And he did a lot of distorted, uncomfortable nudes. This is a self-portrait of himself, grimacing. And so this is a very different kind of self-portrait than we saw with like Rembrandt and Judith Leister, where the artist is kind of giving themselves some, sort of dignity. Instead, Schiele is making you look at him in pain. He did also nudes of a lot of different people. His biggest controversy that he got in trouble for is he also did nudes of children, young teens, and also had relationships with them. So he ends up, he's very kind of controversial. But This Seated Youth was actually at the National Gallery Art. It's actually close to a lot of the Picassos and whatnot. Is also another kind of example of this period. It's right after, or right during, excuse me, kind of the end of World War I. So you see this kind of downtrodden figure. This is no longer kind of the excited, strong sculptures that we've seen before. Kathy Kollwitz. This is Woman with a Dead Child. This is has actually been picked out to be one of the artists that was sort of ignored before, but now everyone's sort of definitely kind of revisiting her work. What is interesting about it is you see the child kind of being grasped here, and the mother is almost kind of monsterish in her grief, and it's quite remarkable, kind of her use of. She did a lot of etchings, as well as she, did a lot of paintings and stuff like that. But her etchings and whatnot really kind of break down to the base. You can kind of see the various musculature of this mother and her strength, but also the grief that she's feeling from losing her child. This is also Kathy Kollwitz. It's a woodcut. And it's the memorial sheet of Karl Liebknecht, and it's from after the end of the war. And this is actually a sort of, Kathy Kollwitz was a little bit of a Marxist, and it has to do with kind of the death of a comrade. And one thing to think about is that this is another Kirchner, is think about how politics and individualism affect style and form of the painting. So the kind of the state of Germany after World War I into World War II really kind of creates a certain form of art that is related to national identity that we will go back and revisit this theme in a bit. Futurism is another kind of area of the war era. It's Italian art, and it's basically a very, it's a rejection of the past. Some context for this is that Futurism comes about after Italian reunification, which happens in about 1870, 80s, 90s. There's sort of kind of this movement to kind of unify all of the provinces of Italy. So when it becomes the turn of the 20th century, and Italy has kind of tried to create its own state, even down to trying to invade and create colonies and whatnot. There's a desire to look forward, not to their rural past. There's a lot of kind of looking downward on their most recent past of poverty and ruralness, and so they end up kind of looking towards the future. So this is part of Filippo Tommaso Marinetti's treatise on Futurism. He says, on account of the persistency of an image on the retina, moving objects constantly multiply themselves and their form changes. Thus, a running horse has not 4 legs, but 20. We declare that all forms of imitation must be despised, all forms of originality forfeited, that all subjects previously used must be swept aside in order to express our whirling life of steel, pride, of fever, and of speed, that movement and light destroy the materiality of bodies. So if you look at futurist art, they very much are interested in movement. Think of them as influenced by Muybridge's kind of photography that we looked at previously. This is Giacomo Balla, Dynamism of a Dog on a Leash. So this woman is taking her dog. You can see the kind of dress and the shoes going back and forth. Look at the dog's feet going around and around, and the leash is zipping back and forth. And so it's the movement forward in the future. Bacchioni, Unique Forms of Continuity in Space, 1913. This is also a very futurist piece where the body is moving into almost into a wind. It's going so fast, and you just see the traces of humanity. It's also very blocky. The futurists were not pacifists. They were the opposite. They thought that they needed to go to war. And this is Gino Severini, The Armored Train, 1915. So this is kind of right in the middle of the war. And it's a glorification of war and the military machine. It also has this kind of new angular style that you see in some of the kind of Cubist influence. Due to kind of some of their beliefs, all of them joined in the war effort of World War One, and most of the futurists actually died in World War One. So the movement thus died with them. After the war, there was a big frustration with how the society had kind of invested in this art culture that seemed for naught. So all these men were fighting in the war, and they came back, and if they were artists, they were sort of cynical of the establishment because they had just fought a war for royalty, hierarchy, and keeping the establishment. So there becomes the movement Dada. Dada is ridiculousness. It's a random term it's a hobby horse from a French dictionary, and it means nothing. And basically, they say art means nothing. So this is the famous quote from Dada. Dada knows everything. Dada spits on everything. Dada says nothing. Dada has no fixed ideas. Dada is never right. No more painters. No more writers. No more religions. No more royalists. No more anarchists. No more socialists. No more police. Like everything in life, Dada is useless. Everything happens in a completely idiotic way. We are incapable of treating seriously any subject whatsoever, let alone the subject ourselves. So this is when Marcel Duchamp comes out with Fountain, which is a urinal. The original was actually disappeared, stolen. This is a makeup of it. The original was produced in 1917. The second version is from 1950. And, he calls this a fountain. This is ready-made objects. He would take things that already existed. R. Mutt is the name of whoever made this urinal originally. And he's hung this in a gallery and people are really upset. But the whole point is that portraits of people and celebration of elite and all these things are just, there's no purpose anymore because we're just all going to go out and kill each other. So it's a very negative feeling about the world after World War One. This is another example. It's actually Elle a chaude cool, which is she is hot in the arse, or she has a hot ass. So, excuse me. It's a vulgar expression, but that is what LHOOQ means. And so just so you know that there is this kind of right here is taking the Mona Lisa and adding what would be a vulgar expression in French. It's by Duchamp. He has added a little goatee to the Mona Lisa, and so kind of putting in face of all tradition. This is Hannah Höch, who is also a Dadaist. She did collage and kind of really brought around kind of using collage as a way to get a political idea across and thus influencing everyone forever. But you can see there's cynicalness about the machine and violence. Dada becomes much maligned amongst Hitler, and he actually creates an exhibit where he he talks about he puts up all of the bad art that he considers to be terrible 20th century art that just shows the worst parts of humanity. And all of our best artists that we're so proud of actually were exhibited in this. So Picasso was in there, Kandinsky, Hannah Höch, Duchamp, and basically they then burned all the art and got rid of it afterwards. But it was an examination of how like modern art, which was anti-authoritarian, so clearly Hitler would not like it, would be kind of admonished in Nazi Germany. We'll discuss a little bit of what art was championed in Nazi Germany. There is the side note that everyone always knows, is that Hitler went to art school. He was a failed student art school. He was a traditionalist, a classicist, but he also could not render things very well at all. And so he hated all these modern artists who could render classical stuff very easily, but chose to do these kind of abstractions. And he just thought that was just horrible. And it was a way to kind of get over his own lack of skill. And so thus the kind of regulation of art was also a very much part of Hitler's agenda. He persecuted artists, he killed them, many of them fled. And the famous Peggy Guggenheim, a Jewish American who's sort of related to the Guggenheim family, but not the one that created that Guggenheim Museum in New York. Peggy Guggenheim went into Paris and Italy, and she actually funneled out more art than anyone else to save it from Hitler. So art was definitely under attack because it was seen as a direct opposition to his regime. So that is it for kind of Europe between the World War One and before World War One to World War Two. Next up, we'll look at some American art, which sort of bridges over the period as well.